We've got gender and sex, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? Is there a difference?
I saw that in your questions and I thought, my goodness, this is what we spend an entire semester kind of thinking through. But what we tend to think about in the social sciences today is that sex refers to a set of biological characteristics and gender is a social construct or category.
So are gender and sex two different things, or?
I find it tiresome when people like Matt Walsh will just feign ignorance, like constantly feign ignorance about any sort of distinction between sex and gender. I get it that they are largely synonymous, but this distinction being made seems quite useful. Surely we all agree that there's a kind of performative aspect to gender, and that what it means to be a woman in ancient Egypt or on the frontier in the 19th century Wyoming or in Elizabethan England are different. And there's a different performance of gender. What it means to be a woman is clearly different between classes, in a specific time. And so this notion that, they just can't bear to even make that distinction, I just find rather tiresome. Now, sex is bifurcated. It's a sort of AB biologically with humans, mammals, most all species. There's no doubt some weird exception of like a seahorse that can change its sex or something. I don't doubt that. But it is a sort of off on. Now, intersex people do exist. And I do think the best way of understanding that, or I guess you could call them hermaphrodites, but I guess the best way you can understand that is sort of the exception that proves the rule. Some sort of mutation or malformation that occurs. And that's what it is. It doesn't really change anything in the matter. It's a lot like going into it's a stupid analogy, but it's a lot like going into a basketball gym and randomly kicking a basketball and it goes in. And then you conclude that kicking balls 100 feet is the best way to score a goal in the game of basketball. I mean, it would be ridiculous. Stupid analogy, but you definitely get my point. So the trans thing, I have all these thoughts on it, and I think it's interesting to think about where this came from. I mean, the easiest example is that it is coming from this long line of liberal projects in which liberals seek out a minority population to liberate and to recognize and to bring into the fold, and in a way to sort of liberalize and bourgeoisify. So I'll get at that. So we've all lived through the American experience, and we have these foundational myths. Rosa Parks on the bus demanding her seat, that's certainly one of them. Jackie Robinson, maybe sort of fading in relevance, but I think that's kind of the ultimate one. There are people, African Americans, who are just as good as whites at playing baseball. They're good-natured people. Jackie Robinson was a Methodist. And through the machinations of people on top, in this case, Branch Rickey, I guess in Rosa Parks' case, the NAACP and ADL, no doubt, that these sort of benign, though hidden, elite figures can bring about change, overcome the natural resistance. People were throwing at Jackie Robinson's head. Rosa Parks gets screamed at. Many people get arrested. But that resistance is overcome. And then we all learn that why did we ever have these prejudices to begin with? There was a commercial on the Super Bowl with Tom Brady and none other than Snoop Dogg, Snoop Doggy Dogg, or just Snoop. He goes by many names, much like, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, P. Diddy P. What, anyway. And they were saying, like, I hate you because you're different. I hate you because you ain't from here. I hate you because you're a different color, and then they're like, racism hate is as weird and stupid as this sounds. And so we all learn that we're sort of all the same at the end of the day. And so people no longer have any sort of issue rooting for a black football player or whatever, or having a black coworker, and so on. And that's the myth. Full integration never really worked for African Americans. There are still clear divides between the different communities. There is a continual crisis in education. A crisis, I'm afraid, I don't even like talking about this because it's just so mean, to be honest, that is solely about African American students. Now, we probably spend too much on education, that's fair enough, but even that is sort of connected to African Americans. But, if you look at American white students, they are scoring at, or in most cases, actually above their peers in France and Germany, above Japan, etc. The ongoing crisis about like why Johnny can't read good and so on really is simply about African Americans. Now, I'm sure there are many important criticisms that could be lodged about education in general and how we were more cultured coming out of a public school in the 60s or 80s even. I probably agree with all those things. But in terms of pure comparison, it's purely about blacks. But on the other hand, there has been a lot of integration. I mean, we all watched the Super Bowl, and that is a kind of celebration of integration on one level. Integration between women, they were next in the 70s. That is also complete. They're not playing football exactly, but and there are obviously tensions between the sexes, but it's been complete. And then it was sort of the gays' turn. And again, with each of these, you're getting at a sort of a smaller percentage of the population. I guess women are 50%, but you understand my point. It's sort of you're digging down into the barrel of marginal communities, and there's diminishing returns with each one. And then it was first gays, and gays were imagined at some point as a kind of outrageous affront to all that is good and decent. The AIDS crisis certainly didn't help out their cause. But at some point, they were treated as just regular Americans. And that has also been largely successful. I don't think people really object too much to their gay coworker. But it's also been interesting with the homosexuality, which I'll dwell on just for a little bit, in the way that homosexuals have been integrated. they've been integrated in the sense that they've been neutralized or bourgeoisified, as I said. So gays, particularly male homosexuals, are rightfully considered more outrageous than your average straight person of any color. Like, there's a reason why people might fear gays or not want them to be integrated in society when you go to a local gay bar and it's men in black leather engaging in God knows what. You know what I'm talking about. And in this weird way, in the way that gays have been integrated into society, that sort of subaltern, or you could say dangerous quality, has been lost. And so now I know that you could definitely go to a gay pride parade and you can find some example of a man with his boyfriend on a leash, dressed in leather with a like ball in his mouth. Or I get it. You can definitely find examples of that, and conservatives are eager to sort of, dilate on those and express them. But the real story, in my mind, has been bourgeoisification of homosexuals, where it wasn't a dangerous thing that you would do that was outside of society. Oscar Wilde, the love that dare not speak its name, he sued a man for libel, for calling him. The man said that he was impersonating a homosexual, and he lost that libel suit and had to spend a few years on the treadmill in the English penal system or something like that. But Oscar Wilde himself, great playwright and poet and novelist, but he was a flamboyant person of his time, accepted by society to a degree, but accepted sort of like Elton John is accepted, a kind of lovable eccentric or exception, etc. But gays almost had to give up that dangerous side to themselves in order to be fully integrated. So the homosexual was forced to become heterosexual. And the ultimate expression of that is gay marriage, where, now two men can have a mortgage together. They can visit each other if one is in hospital. They can inherit wealth from one another or whatever. They're fully integrated into middle class society, is what I'm saying. And that is the process. Now, I'm not gay, and I don't know. Maybe many of my music choices are quite gay. That's true. Yeah, if you just look at my music choices, you might conclude that I am in fact a gay man who listens to opera. Has a few albums produced by Erasure. I mean, wow. But regardless, sometimes sometimes it quacks like a duck, but isn't a duck. I'm not 100% behind the homosexual lifestyle, but even I could recognize that maybe something has been lost. You've lost that dangerous outsider, subaltern quality, and you've been turned in to a heterosexual, middle class, boring normie. You can just imagine that at one point the gay was listening to alternative music and experimenting with drugs and engaging in Dionysian revelry. And then fast forward 20 years and Gary, your gay colleague at a major corporation, is baking rainbow cupcakes for the Gay Pride Week celebration at the office party. You- It's sort of boring. It's sort of dumb. It's almost a heterosexual, dare I say. Not to say that heterosexuals are boring, but you get my point. And so that's been the process. Now, once gays were fully neutralized by the government and by the overwhelming liberal assumptions of our society, what's next? You know, I think at one point in, what was it, in 2014, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, came out as gay. And, you know, when the CEO of the then largest corporation, or one of them, is gay, well, I mean, what are we even talking about at some point? You know, that they're an oppressed group. This is sort of bizarre to call them that. And shortly after that, there was a new push, and you know, it was, I guess, who became Caitlyn Jenner. What was his name again before Kyle?
Bruce Jenner.
Bruce. Okay. Why did he choose Caitlyn? That
I
sounds
don't
like a
know.
millennial girl who's on the basketball team. Caitlyn. Doesn't it? It's
That's
kind of an
why.
odd choice. That's why. uh, maybe I shouldn't say basketball, volleyball team. But anyway, Bruce Jenner, an amazing athlete, and then he changes his sex. What I've heard is that he actually dates other male to female transsexuals. I'm not even positive about that. Certainly not passing any sort of judgment, but that also sort of raises, I guess, some questions about the different types of transsexual. Are some transsexuals homosexual transsexuals who want to present themselves as enticing and alluring to men? They're in a way kind of hyper gay or something. And are other transsexuals a kind of narcissistic transsexual where you are sexualizing your own body, making your body an object of desire? It's an interesting thought. But this affects a very small percentage of the population. And it might be growing to some degree. I think we definitely had an issue with social contagion, particularly among teenage girls, which is rather odd in itself, as it usually is the male that is the straw that stirs the cocktail. In the sense of males are just more perverted. They're more likely to engage in criminal sexual activity. They're more likely to hire prostitutes. They're more likely to be obsessed with porn. They're more likely to fetishize whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, it was a social contagion, and I think there's some reason to believe that it's dying down, actually. That it was kind of the, you know, anorexia of the 90s, and this is over. But it's a weird thing. I mean, so to go back to that bigger story of like the American 20th century story of integrating minorities and in a way neutralizing them, making them not dangerous. Blacks might riot, they might commit crime, they might be nationalist and want to destroy white society, but no, we can sort of bring them in. Women too, and gays now, and we'll just do trans. But the trans thing is just different. It's not, you don't wear transsexuality on your sleeve like you do with race, where skin color is very obvious, or sex or gender, whatever you want to say. So what do we do with this? And I guess the interesting thing that I've thought about, two things. So trans, of course, means across, like we know translate or transverse or transportation, etc. And I also thought a little bit about the idea of transubstantiation. Now, is this just a sort of word game or elective affinity? I'm not sure. So the idea of transubstantiation in the Catholic Church is based on Aristotle, in effect. It's a notion of what is referred to kind of deceptively as like an accident and then an essence or core. And so when you participate in the Eucharist, the bread that you eat and the wine that you drink, it might have these surface or accidental in their language qualities of being bread, of being wheat or oats and wine, fermented grapes or whatever. But that's not really what it is. It's literally, in fact, in its very essence, the flesh and blood of Jesus. You are, as a Catholic, sacrificing Jesus over and over again to the Father every Sunday. You're never getting over it. Martin Luther himself said that it's weird. He actually agreed with the Catholic Church. I mean, it doesn't make sense. He was a Catholic reformer. When he said, this is my body, you don't have to make recourse to Aristotle. The word is right there in the Greek, and boom, this is my body. So Luther, in fact, believed in transubstantiation. Most Catholics, there was some fascinating poll where 70% of Catholics think that the Eucharist is a metaphor. And so you ask them, like, are you actually eating the body of Jesus? They're like, oh, no, it's just a metaphor. The Holy Spirit's there, of course. So they've, in a way, become Protestants. So the Anglican Church says that the bread is the bread and the wine is wine, but the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of the Last Supper is there with you. So it is a metaphor. We are not literally sacrificing Jesus. Jesus has already been sacrificed. And so I guess why I'm going on this long digression in terms of Catholic theology is that that's what you, in a way, have to believe if you believe in transsexuality. That your penis, your flat chest, your balls, even your DNA is an accident. It's a surface, superficial, maybe even sort of meaningless quality of who you are. Those chromosomes don't really mean anything. There's some inner core. And you can see in the notion of transubstantiation, you can see that presupposition of something like an immortal soul. That you can die and you're hit by a bus and you're just lying there on the sidewalk. Your body, at least. But that is a corpse. Your soul has gone up to heaven, or maybe hell, or maybe purgatory for many years, but you can shorten that time by paying the church. But you are not you. There's something about you that is beyond you and is not merely your corpse. And to think of you as your corpse is to sort of misunderstand everything. I don't think transgenderism or transsexuality makes any sense whatsoever unless you presume that type of thinking. You have to believe in an immortal soul. There has to be some, whether you want to call it a psyche or a soul or an essence, there's something beyond your body, even beyond your DNA. And it is sort of funny that Christians are like, you can't change DNA or whatever. Well, I don't know. Maybe in some weird way, these transgendered activists are more Christian than you are. Or they're extrapolating Christianity in a way that's relevant and modern and that you don't want to. So I would assert that you have to believe that for any of that to make sense. The other thing is, my dear friend Judith Butler, friend of the show, longtime subscriber, and just kidding. I was forced to read Judith Butler, but I'm glad that I read Judith Butler because I think she's actually interesting as opposed to most every trans activist who doesn't interrogate any of these ideas and just wants to be recognized to do his or her or their thing and not be questioned and to, you know, go to a sanctuary city for transsexuals in Massachusetts and let their freak flag fly. That kind of stuff. Judith Butler actually interrogated these ideas. She questioned the real existence of sex, I think in a very wrong, or you could even say kind of bad faith way of, well, what do you say about intersex people or hermaphrodites or whatever? See, it's not a binary. Well, I don't buy that. But as a Nietzschean myself, I have a lot of sympathy towards her version of transsexuality. And it's very different. Whereas the transsexual conception of most activists today is Catholic, I guess you could weirdly say, or Christian. They have a presumption of something that they're never going to even interrogate or think through. Judith Butler is a Nietzschean. Now, she's a left Nietzschean. There's no question about it. Much like there's left Hegelians and right Hegelians. They met at Stalingrad. But she's a left Nietzschean, but she is a Nietzschean. And so her concept of being a transsexual is a sort of transvestite concept, at least in gender theory. She has another book. I saw the bookstore. I don't know, didn't buy it. Maybe she's refined this, but I don't think she has. Her crucial insight was there in the 90s with Gender Trouble. And it is that when a drag performer goes on stage, let's say this drag performer has a penis, and let's say that this person calls himself Crazy Sally. Well, when Crazy Sally has all of this makeup on and is performing a amazing lip sync rendition of Diana Ross at a nightclub or whatever, Crazy Sally can kind of pass for a woman. You know, like if you just walked into the room and saw Sally, you might be taken aback. There's a sort of edginess quality to the ambiguity, like stronger chin or features, but then all this feminine energy. But she sort of passes as a woman. But then because of the parodic parody quality of the performance, you know that Sally is a man. But then you also start to wonder, is there an essence to Sally that is actually a man? That it doesn't matter if Sally has a penis, that on the inside, that beyond the accidents of appearance, she's a woman. There's a female spirit or essence or psyche or soul or whatever. But then when you see this performance, you start to question whether such a thing as a soul exists at all. Because Sally, by lip syncing Diana Ross's I Will Survive on stage at a nightclub, has deconstructed gender, deconstructed the whole idea of a soul or psyche itself. She is a Ubermensch in some weird way. She is smashing our values that we have held for at least 2,000 years, and in fact, quite longer than that. So she is this dangerous Nietzschean figure. I am not a left Nietzschean, but as I said, it's kind of an interesting concept. So Judith Butler is not violent or anything, but she is sort of engaged in revolution of a Nietzschean kind, of not just, say, changing the laws where transsexual people will have greater respect, but smashing the tables of values that have lasted for thousands of years. I mean, that's what the project she's engaged in. So again, I oppose it, but I respect it. But it is sort of funny how she's, the founding mother of the transsexual movement, at least the way to think about it. Now, there was other instances of transsexuality, particularly in Weimar, Germany, Magnus Hirschfeld, and I actually know less about these people. It would be, I did see on Amazon, there was actually a new book about Hirschfeld. I was, I don't know, kind of considering reading it. Do I want to invest dozens of hours? I don't know. But I would be curious how he thought of these things. But I simply don't know. I know more of the modern incarnation. But it's interesting how Judith Butler is the founding mother of transsexuality, but the actual transsexuals and the way that people have dealt with them and engaged with them and tried to neutralize them don't take anything from her. So they have, like, transsexuality is accepted in society to the degree that it can be neutralized and turned into a bourgeois phenomenon. Because that's what America does. It's a big meat grinder that takes things and turns out a processed bourgeois product. And that meat grinder can even absorb transsexuality, which is pretty shocking. And it's the only way that people who put forth this idea that they should be respected and have legal rights as a transsexual is by the presupposition of an immortal soul. And yet that's the thing that they don't like to confront. And so you sort of have this battle, a Caducean battle, you could say, within Christianity over transsexuality, where the old guard is saying, he created man and woman in our image, man and woman, they created. Genesis 1. And these other people who are sort of taking Christian concepts of the immortal soul and sort of making them relevant in a way. And the Nietzscheans are kind of outside that dialectic. Because whenever you hear liberals support transsexuality or gay marriage or homosexuals, they'll basically say, like, what is this to you? This doesn't affect you at all. It's just what they want to do. And their bedroom, it's what they don't even say that anymore. It's their identity. But it doesn't affect you. And they're sort of right, because both concepts are like within the cage of bourgeois Christian morality. Anyway, some thoughts.